And this is WMNF Tampa. Stay tuned for True Talk.
مخيب هالدنيا ومحلاها الدنيا بلا غسرة. فكرت أيامي وقلت يا حسرة. مخيب هالدنيا ومحلاها الدنيا بلا غسرة. فحكيت لأمي ما وناس بالقيمة وعشرة قديمة وقلت يا حسرة. رضيت والدينا وينك يا حنينة تفرقنا مشينا وقلت يا حسرة. ما أحلانا ذراري الدنيا محلاها ماما وزينها ديما مواتاها. محلاها الحومة ديما الحومة مظلومة. قتلتنا الشيخة وزادت قتلتنا الحكومة. فكرت اللمة قسمنا اللي فما وكل حد وهمه وكنا محلانا. واليوم زمامة وبكات الماما خشومات في الشمة شكون اللي بلانا. فكرت أصحابي حبوا على خرابي. عطيتهم ترابي فرشوش وكفرشنا زرابي. عيب على روحي ما نعيبش على قرابي. رقدت ونحلم وفكت نجري على سرابي. وفي غيبوبة وينك يا صحوبة وطلعوا ذيوبة وناس خوانا. بيوتنا مقلوبة وطلب بالتوبة وأيام محسوبة والوقت يخذنا. فكرت أيامي وقلت يا حسرة. مخيب هالدنيا ومحلاها الدنيا بلا غسرة. فكرت أيامي وقلت يا حسرة. مخيب هالدنيا ومحلاها الدنيا بلا غسرة. فحكيت لأمي ما وناس بالقيمة وعشرة قديمة وقلت يا حسرة. رضيت والدينا وينك يا حنينة تفرقنا مشينا وقلت يا حسرة. فكرت روحي لقيت روحي ضاعت مني. رقد متحير وينو لي رقد متهني. عجبتني الجارة اليوم الجارة عروسة تحني. فكرت الليالي سهر كل فرزي تنغني. وشربنا الروجة ضيعنا الموجة اختوينا عوجة ضحكة وبكانا. بالخير ما يروشة وما حبوشة كلنا الحربوشة والحب كوانا. فكرت شبابي ربحت وخسرت تراحي. روح للدار امي مالي تكمد لي جراحي. فكرت احزاني ومحلى الدنيا في فرحي. مسكينة بلادي الشايخ اكثر من اللي صاحي. وصغار مدرينا وضحكوا علينا ما مشينا قرينا مشينا بهوانا. واليوم شبينا ضحكتنا حزينة وقل لي وينا نلقى ودوانا. فكرت أيامي وقلت يا حسرة. مخيب هالدنيا ومحلاها الدنيا بلا غسرة. فكرت أيامي وقلت يا حسرة. مخيب هالدنيا ومحلاها الدنيا بلا غسرة. ضحكت لأمي ما وناس بالقيمة وعشرة قديمة وقلت قلت يا حسرة رضاية والدينا إيه وينك يا حنينة إيه تفرقنا مشينا إيه وقلت يا حسرة.
Welcome to True Talk on WMNF 88.5 with Ahmed and Samar. We're live in the studio, and big news happening coming out of Palestine, Gaza, that there's now a anticipated ceasefire that will start on Sunday. And on today's program, we're going to be speaking to Mohammed Shahada. Of course, Samar Jarrah is joining me live also. Samar, before we get to our guest, what was your reaction? I guess a lot of us anticipated this would happen before Trump's inauguration. Were you surprised that it took place, or?
Assalamu alaikum, Ahmed, and hello to all our listeners. Actually, I wasn't surprised. I did some sort of a mini lecture 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, and I said I predict that Trump is going to do what Reagan did so many years ago, when before his inauguration or during his inauguration, the image was about the hostages leaving Iran and being released. And I said he's going to be pressuring Benjamin Netanyahu to sign some sort of a ceasefire agreement, which I think Mohammed is going to explain to us that it's the same agreement that was on the table at least 8 months ago. So no, I wasn't surprised, Ahmed, but I am really worried about the latest news that Benjamin refuses to sign it, claiming that Hamas renegated on some of the conditions. But I'm very, very happy that late we have Mohammed with us, who will join us after a few minutes to explain to us what is going on. So no, Ahmed, I was not surprised that this is happening. Shocking, I'm sorry to interrupt you, is that it's the same agreement that was on the table at least 8 months ago, and it shows to what degree Joe Biden is really, truly a genocide enabler.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically nothing new in the agreement. It could have been signed months ago, saved many lives, and it just seems that Biden did not apply the pressure, as Trump is applying pressure, and Trump wants to come in looking, that he stopped this. But I was surprised by, I guess, Democrats and Republicans were rushing to take credit for what happened, including Joe Biden and Blinken taking credit, saying that this is the plan, this was Biden's plan all along, and that he rallied people behind. And I saw that when Blinken gave a speech and he said, well, now the ball is in Hamas's court, as if everybody agreed except Hamas is somehow holding out. When in reality, apparently this is something that Hamas had agreed to months ago. It's the exact same thing. And the only person that has been, the only government that's been an obstacle to it is Netanyahu's government, who has been blocking this all along. And Netanyahu himself personally has torpedoed ceasefire talks in the past to the point that his defense minister resigned and left the government. Right?
Yes, Ahmed. And I think now, as we speak, Blinken is giving a speech, his departing speech, and he's being interrupted. And if you were listening to NPR just a few minutes ago, they are showing the hypocrisy of Blinken and Harris. And I think, Ahmed, there was a poll that came out yesterday or the day before, and it shows that so many people, maybe 25% of those who did not vote for Harris, did not vote for her in the critical states, is because of her stance from the genocide in Gaza.
Right, that she didn't depart from it. And we talked about this before. We suspected that Gaza played a huge role in Harris's defeat. She got somewhere between 7 to 10 million less votes than Biden got. So these are people who voted for Biden in 2020, but refused to vote or come out and vote for Harris. Some of them didn't vote at all. for her because Trump's vote number was pretty much stayed the same from 2020 to 2024. However, she lost something like 7 to 10 million votes that Biden had received. And you're saying about 25% of those was because of Gaza. Was not only that, Gaza was their top issue, was their number one issue.
Yeah, but let's bring Mohammed Shahada, who is a journalist from Gaza, actually. He's a writer and analyst and really brilliant young man. Good morning, Mohammed, or good evening, where you are.
Good evening, Samar and Ahmed. Thanks so much for having me. Great to be on the show with you.
Yes, Mohammed, I have been following you for a long time, actually, and I admire your ability to bring back dates and your memory. I guess this is what young people are known for, a great memory. And this is what is going to make me really rely on you so much when we talk about the ceasefire agreement, because I know you said that it is almost verbatim what was on the table all these months ago. I want to talk about the ceasefire agreement, but before we do that, this disturbing news that Benjamin Netanyahu is refusing to sign it, and he is blaming Hamas. Do you have any new information that you can share with us? Like, what is going on?
And basically, I think Netanyahu was counting on the actual agreement not being leaked to the media so that he can claim that Hamas is violating it or not agreeing to it by making up new conditions. But to his misfortune, the entire agreement was leaked last night, late in the evening, in an Arabic and an English copy. The agreement, the appendix, all the details attached to it, word for word, the literal copy that Hamas and then Israel agreed to. So this morning, he woke up on the wrong side of the bed and he decided to change some terms in the agreement that are monumental at the very core of it. Number one is, what does a ceasefire mean? Does it mean dictate of Hamas's surrender, or does it mean cessation of hostilities? What I understand, my English is self-taught, excuse me, not a native speaker, but I think a ceasefire means ceasing fire. It does not mean a dictation of surrender. Whereas Netanyahu is now demanding that if there is to be a ceasefire, Hamas needs to achieve what is, quote, the objectives of the war, or Israel's objectives of the war. These objectives are the complete dismantling of Hamas, the complete military defeat of Hamas, removing Hamas's government in Gaza, de-radicalizing and denazifying Gaza, something that is pulling out of a Putin playbook in Ukraine, as well as returning the hostages. So he's saying Israel has failed over the last 15 months of genocide, as Barak Ravid put it, biblical destruction in Gaza, over 70,000 people killed, and yet Israel failed to defeat Hamas. They failed to dismantle its military wing, the Qassam brigades. And now he wants Hamas to do that job for him, for free, in return for the ceasefire, which was not in any way included in any of the discussions up until he just imposed it this morning. The other thing that he's asking for is that the ceasefire agreement, it comes with a time frame and maps, because this time around Palestinian negotiators have a lot of better experiences. Samar would know this a lot better than me, with loopholes in previous agreements, the Oslo Accords, the Taba Accords, whatever accords they signed on with Israel, that every time there is a vagueness in the wording, Israel would exploit it to sort of violate that agreement into virtual obsolescence. So this time around, Palestinian negotiators were a lot more conscious, and they said, we want maps, timeframes, definitive exact locations where the IDF is going to be and where they're going to withdraw, which day, which time of the day, and all of these details. So they agreed to these very, very micro level details. And yet Netanyahu woke up this morning and decided to just pull out of the entire agreement. So in the agreement, it says that Israel will reduce the number of IDF soldiers in the Philadelphia corridor. That's the one that separates Gaza from Egypt. So it's very vital for the entry of humanitarian aid that Israel is not there, because they are the ones that are restricting it. They literally turn back whole trucks if they find in the truck a single nail clipper or a sleeping tent in the wrong color, or if they find crutches, or if they find, quote, seeded fruits like dates or apricots or whatever fruit has a seed inside it, they turn back the whole truck. So it's monumental to get them out of that corridor. So there is a direct opening between Gaza and Egypt. And the agreement says that the IDF will reduce its forces there and will leave the Rafah border crossing, Gaza's main window to the world through Egypt. And they will be redeployed around it, but not inside it. Netanyahu woke up this morning and said, no, none of that is going to happen. The IDF will not pull a single soldier. Literally, that's the statement that came out of his office. He said, there will not be any reduction of forces. We will not take away any military outposts or installations in Philadelphia. We will stay there, but we will redeploy, reorganize the deployment of soldiers in that corridor. Another thing, it said that on day 50 of the agreement, Israel should leave the Philadelphia corridor completely. Now, Netanyahu says that absolutely that's not going to happen. There's no departure from the Philadelphia corridor until the war goals or objectives are all achieved. So in other words, he's just trying to throw a wrench at the very final last minute in the entire ceasefire arrangement to just break it down. And up until now, as you mentioned, Samar, the Biden administration has been more than willing to aid Netanyahu to the degree that Blinken and Biden angered and frustrated even Israel's negotiating team. Israel's negotiating team, they're not made out of peaceniks. They're not sort of pro-Palestinian leftists. The negotiating team includes the chief of the Shin Bet, Israel's internal security agency, the chief of the Mossad. I don't need to introduce that to listeners. An IDF general called Nitzan Alon, also with a very long antagonistic history towards Palestinians. So if you have those hardcore, right-wing, very sort of masculine Israeli hardliners being the Israeli negotiating team and still being more critical and very critical of Biden and Blinken and blaming Blinken, literally it came out yesterday that Israel's negotiator said Blinken destroyed the talks by claiming that Netanyahu accepted and Hamas rejected. So that's the combination that you're dealing with. You have an American administration that is pathological, that has a compulsive habit of involuntarily, like even after the deal was signed, and as you just mentioned, Samar, the deal is signed, everything is final, there is a ceasefire, and yet Blinken, out of just compulsion, pure compulsion, he says, yeah, the ball now is in Hamas's court, we're waiting for Hamas's answer. Like, we saw documents of Hamas signing and stamping every single member of Hamas's negotiating team. It's quite bizarre. I've never seen anything like this.
Ahmed, I have like a million questions for you at the moment, but
sure, go ahead.
Has there been any reaction by the Trump team and towards what Benjamin Netanyahu just announced? And has there been any reaction from Hamas to this late development?
Yeah, from Hamas itself, they said, we signed an agreement. The agreement is there. We both agreed to it. Why should we negotiate a new one if it's settled? And they're refusing to budge, because what Netanyahu is saying is that there's only going to be a temporary pause. And if Hamas does not surrender, dismantle itself, hand over all of its weapons at the end of this, dismantle its government, hand over Gaza to Israel, then the war will resume and continue again. So it's a no-brainer that they would say no to this. With Trump's team, it's yet to be seen. But my understanding is that Netanyahu keeps a close eye on American media. Basically, if you look at the news cycle in the U.S. yesterday, you saw multiple Trump officials giving him a hint that they are still on board with the goal of destroying Hamas. Some of them even went as far as saying, we want every last member of Hamas to be killed. That's something like, I think, Mike Waltz, who's going to be Trump's national security advisor, as well as Tom Cotton, lunatic douchebag senator. So when Netanyahu sees these signals coming out of Trump's immediate circle, he becomes more confident to reinstate the objectives that Israel never managed to achieve, which is the total dismantling or destruction of Hamas.
I'm trying, Mohammed, very quickly to look at Twitter feed, and there are a number of news items that mention like the way they are writing, you know how biased U.S. Mainstream media is in its coverage, but like almost taking the side of the Palestinians after this morning, at least in the past few hours. So do you see any shift in U.S. Media coverage, not 100% blaming Hamas as much as like acting as if they are confused, or that maybe Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to stay in power? And even like just before we got on the show, NPR News was interviewing one of the analysts and saying all that Benjamin Netanyahu is interested in is to stay in power.
Yeah,
like
precisely.
You see a shift.
Yep. I think there's, now that the momentum is on, there is a sort of earnest efforts to get it done with, to seal the deal. So I think now, since yesterday at least, I've seen mainstream media suddenly out of the blue becoming a little more critical of Israel than before. Even when the news of a ceasefire sounded imminent, that's when you had CBS releasing their 60-minute documentary on Gaza, showing exclusive footage that they have kept in the dark secret for the last 8 months, and only aired it when a ceasefire seemed imminent. So yes, there is a window of opportunity now of seeing more mainstream media being a little bit critical now that the war is sort of coming to a close or to an end. But I wouldn't be too optimistic about it. I was surprised yesterday to see, for example, MSNBC yesterday quoting me on what I've been saying since July, so for the last 5-6 months, that Hamas accepted the deal on July 2nd, Israel rejected, Biden has been covering it up for them. So I was surprised that they suddenly quoted me now many months after, brought it from the grave to make a point in some article. So basically, yeah, I wouldn't say it's any sort of will-intention change. It's just there's momentum now to get it done with.
If you're just joining us, this is True Talk on WMNF, the True Talk radio show. This show is live. It's also, or if you're listening to us on the podcast, on your platform, we're speaking to Mohammed Shahada. He's a Palestinian journalist, was based in Gaza. And we're speaking about this imminent ceasefire that is now facing some obstacles because of Netanyahu. I was going to ask you about this 60 Minutes coverage because they went in depth. They showed that Israel used 2,000-pound bombs. They were carrying out war crimes. They had former State Department officials who had resigned. All this had happened months ago, but now they're airing it. And it seems to me like they knew this all along. It wasn't like a new investigation. However, maybe they're just covering themselves so that way they don't seem as complicit, because the media has known this, and there are so many accusations that the American media has been providing cover for this genocide, and in some ways enabled it. And so that's part of it. Maybe you can touch up a little bit more about that. But also on that note, it seems like whatever Netanyahu is doing now, waking up today and saying that his cabinet is not going to meet to approve the ceasefire deal, which is the last critical step, it doesn't seem like the U.S. government was ready for that, or the media on this side, because all the coverage, everyone is basically saying that this ceasefire is done. Even Jewish organizations, ADL, AIPAC, all the pro-Israel groups have issued statements welcoming the ceasefire. And Blinken has given his speech about the day after and what they plan to do. So how is he going to walk back from, or is he basically just using this as one more way to leverage something else out of the United States, before he actually signs the deal?
For Netanyahu, he's hoping that Trump will lean more on Qatar and Egypt to pressure Hamas. He's also hoping that the scenes of jubilant Gazan crowds yesterday, who had their hopes skyrocket, that there's the slimmest opportunity of them surviving basically genocide, that might also create some pressure on Hamas. And he is hoping, as you said, Ahmed, that he can get something more out of Trump. He's already been promised a gift bag by the Trump administration. One item in it is what Secretary of State, the incoming one, Marco Rubio, said in the Senate yesterday. He said that they will lift all sanctions on Israeli extremists, settlers, Israeli settler organizations, high-tech spyware companies, etc. That is the first item on the agenda. There's another gift that Trump promised, which is basically to allow Israel to violate the ceasefire agreement as much as they want. The verbatim quote was that Trump would allow them to retroactively violate the ceasefire agreement and resume the fighting in Gaza if Israel chooses fit. And the third item was basically allowing major land theft in the West Bank, just swallowing up major chunks of it. So basically, you could see that there is a possibility of Netanyahu wanting to extract a heavier price, but there's also Netanyahu trying to buy time until the very last moment. Samar mentioned basically previous inaugurations of American presidents that brought different political dilemmas or predicaments to an end. There was a similar one in 2008, 2009, if you remember that one, Operation Cast Lead. That's when Obama's inauguration was supposed to happen in January. Israel had virtually occupied major chunks of the Gaza Strip. There was a major land invasion. They almost reached the very heart of Gaza, the Rimal Street or the Shifa Hospital. They were surrounding it from both sides. But at the very last minute, Ehud Olmert, the Israeli prime minister, decides to pull out. The only reason why he pulled out, basically his own military generals were saying that we were very close to dealing a death blow to Hamas. That was their position. The only reason he pulled out the last minute is because Obama, a stupefying narcissist, he did not want anything to distract from the glory of his inauguration day. That was basically it. So Israel had to comply. And you have the same dynamic now with Trump. What Netanyahu is trying to do is maximize the killing, destruction, and sort of exploitation of the cover of the war in Gaza as much as possible, to also not only do horrible atrocities in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well. As long as the war is ongoing, you have momentum. The war creates opportunities that are otherwise impossible to carry out. You're seeing, for example, in Hawara settler attacks, you're seeing IDF raids and bombings across the West Bank this week. And you're seeing since yesterday, since the ceasefire was announced, that Israel killed almost 100 people and wounded 200. And those are the ones we know about in Gaza itself. 100 people in less than a day. In 2014, we called that the Friday Massacre. It was one of the biggest events of the 2014 war. Now it doesn't even get a passing mention. There's also the nature of the targetings that are happening in Gaza. In the very last minutes of the IDF being able to murder or mass kill people in Gaza, they're going after journalists, humanitarian workers, as well as human rights experts that have been documenting what is happening in Gaza. So I think this morning there was news about a prominent human rights officer in Gaza, I think part of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, that was killed in a targeted airstrike with his children. So basically,
can you say that again?
As much as possible to bury evidence.
You broke up a little bit. You said the human rights activist, he was killed in a targeted attack where?
Yeah, that was this morning. There was a human rights activist from the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, one of the main human rights organizations in Gaza, if not one of the top in all of Palestine. And that officer was killed with his wife and children in a targeted airstrike on his home. So you're seeing a deliberate last-minute effort to bury evidence, to kill people that would be able to present a solid case against Israel in courts internationally.
Right, and it's very obvious because yesterday there was something like almost 100 people, if I'm not wrong, that were killed in attacks. This is after post-ceasefire announcement. And they're rushing to do as much damage as possible, finish whatever they need. It's almost like you have a task list, and you want to be able to destroy as much as possible ahead of a deadline. But is this going to end up being like the ceasefire in Lebanon, where after the ceasefire there, they just continue to bomb as whenever they wanted to?
Well, basically, the Palestinian negotiating team learned the mistakes of Hezbollah in terms of the wordings. Because in the Lebanese Israeli ceasefire, it said something about suspending offensive attacks or operations, which gave Israel the loophole of saying, no, our attacks are defensive, they're not offensive. It's just as stupefying as that. It's insane. So in the agreement that Israel and Hamas are signing on, it says suspending all military operations or suspending hostilities in the first phase. It also says that Israel would suspend its aircraft missions and surveillance drones missions in the skies of Gaza for about 10 hours every single day for the next 42 days as hostages are being released. So I would say the wording of the agreement makes it difficult for Israel to carry out attacks like we see in Lebanon, but it's not far-fetched that they would do it anyways. Basically, if you take a look, for example, at Gazans that will try to go back to northern Gaza, last time around when there was a ceasefire, the IDF kept shooting and killing those. Dozens were killed within the week that there was a cessation of hostilities, supposedly. They will find other ways to continue. Israel can claim that they perhaps managed to locate a Hamas cell that's trying to regroup and launch an attack on Israel, and they hit them preemptively. It's not far-fetched of all of these mental gymnastics that Israel has been doing in Lebanon. They might very highly likely do it again in Gaza as well.
In his speech, Blinken, or his press conference, Blinken had mentioned that Hamas has been able to recruit as many fighters, new fighters, recently to replace the ones that were destroyed or killed by Israel. Do you think that the assessment is true? And what is, in your assessment, I guess, the strength of Hamas now? Have they really been decimated, or are they continuing to recruit, or are they continuing to grow? And what has Israel actually achieved in Gaza in the past 15 months?
Well, basically, in terms of Hamas's manpower, I think Blinken's statement is even an understatement. So Hamas, the estimate is that they lost about 7,000 members. That includes militants as well as members of Hamas as a political group, as well as militants from other less known groups or more minor groups like the Palestinian Islamic Jihad or Shuhada al-Aqsa or PLFP or other smaller ones. So if you combine all of these, you would say that you would put the figure of military losses, at least the ones that we know about, because there is a number of missing Palestinians in Gaza. Usually in areas the IDF controls, when they kill Palestinians, they can bury them on the spot or mix their bodies with the rubble or just leave it on the street for literally for cats and dogs to devour. But what we know is that the overall figure is about 7,000. Hamas, they managed to deploy about 6,500 members of what is known as ISNAD, the backup force. Those are members with rudimentary knowledge of militant activities, so they know how to handle explosive devices, ambushes, rifles, light weaponry, which is basically all you need in a guerrilla warfare. They also managed to recruit, according to even Israeli estimates, they managed to recruit about 12,000 to 13,000 new members to Hamas in its entirety as a group or as a militant wing. So if you combine these two, Hamas managed to even recruit more people than it lost during the war. In other dimensions, if you look at Hamas's leadership, they were largely decimated. They were heavily hit. But there are still for example, the Qassam Brigade's military council, that is the top leading entity in Hamas's military wing. You have 5 top leaders, 5 top commanders from that military council that are still alive. One of them is Ahmed Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar's younger brother, who is much more well-trained, much smarter, much sort of hardline, according to Israel, much more uncompromising. So they got rid of Yahya, they got a more nightmarish version from an Israeli perspective. Yahya did not have much military experience. His brother is one of the founders of the Qassam Brigade, and now he's in charge of the Qassam Brigades in southern Gaza. There's another one, Abu Suaib al-Haddad, in charge of the north, and 3 other top commanders. There's also a number of Hamas's top politicians that are still alive in Gaza. Mahmoud Zahar, for example, one of the movement's co-founders, a number of others. So basically, in terms of decimating the leadership, even on the top leadership level, Ismail Haniyeh being assassinated and Saleh Haruri, you can see that Hamas immediately recovered from it, because Hamas is not a movement with a messianic leadership where there is one personality that commands or brings the entire group together. They used to have that with Ahmed Yassin, not anymore. They are more or less a very sort of concretely hierarchical organization, where if you assassinate one leader, there would be multiple underneath him that will take over instead. So now, after Haniyeh's killing, after Sinwar's killing, 5 new leaders jumped to take over the movement. Khalil Hayya, Nazar Awadallah, Zahir Jabarin, Khalid Mesh'al, and Omar Abu, what's his name? Omar Darwish, Omar Hassan. So basically, the strategy of decimating the leadership did not work as well. There's the third strategy, attacking Hamas's infrastructure and tunnels. In fairness, I would say the vast majority of Hamas's rockets have been depleted. But at the same time, Israel, by the mere viciousness of its genocide in Gaza, it left Hamas a ginormous, unprecedented historic treasure in the form of unexploded ordnance that Hamas can very easily recycle and make rockets out of it, or explosive devices. So basically, about 10% of Israeli bombs in Gaza don't explode. 10% of about 100,000 tons that were thrown on Gaza or dropped on Gaza, you have about 10,000 tons of unexploded ordnance. That is like a treasure trove to re-establish Hamas's sort of military force. In terms of tunnels, American estimates were saying that about 65% of the tunnels are still in place. But I would draw a silver lining by saying that what matters the most from an international perspective is usually saying, if there is a ceasefire, does that mean another October 7th? And any serious Israeli expert that you speak to will say, absolutely not. The chance of another October 7th is an absolute zero, because October 7th was more of a disaster than an offensive. In other words, October 7th, as Netanyahu's chief advisor, Mark Regev, put it at the time, it was a moment where Israel's military were caught off guard with their pants down, drunk, driving without their hands on the wheel. They also committed a number of systematic, catastrophic mistakes that all of them aligned on that day and gave a perfect opportunity for this attack to unfold. So, for example, Israel had 7 surveillance balloons all over Gaza, very advanced, very high-tech. Most of them were down, and the IDF was lazy about fixing them. They were inoperable. Israel had only 3 battalions around Gaza on the 7th October. They had 23 battalions in the West Bank, 23 versus 3, so more than 7 times as much. And the reason was because Israeli extremist ministers wanted to celebrate a Jewish holiday by taunting and terrorizing the residents of Hawara in the West Bank. So there was a whole number of mistakes. There were IDF spotters, those young women at the Nahal Oz military base. They were sending a lot of reports about an imminent Hamas attack, until the minute that Hamas militants showed up at that Nahal Oz military outpost. Those soldiers were sending reports after reports and calls for help, and their commanders were dismissing it. They thought, no, none of it is serious.
Right, so they ignored them.
Yeah, exactly. The chances of these mistakes being committed again is close to zero, which is, I think, the only thing that matters the most. It doesn't matter if Hamas continues to survive, if you know that there's not a possibility of another October 7th-like attack on Israel again.
So if they did not succeed in destroying Hamas, and now it seems like the world's attention, they've lost a lot of credibility around the world. They're now seen as some sort of pariah state by many. More people are determined, more countries are determined to try to establish a Palestinian state. Netanyahu's image, with the exception of a few countries, the United States, Germany, maybe France, is really in the gutter. Was this the genocide they carried out? Like basically at the end, in the long term, who's going to come out? Was the response by Israel something that they'll regret later? Well,
basically, as soon as the genocide began, There's an Israeli journalist that I know. He's called Haviv Gur. He usually writes in the Times of Israel, and he posted on the 12th of October, so about 5 days after the attack, a message he got from someone from Gaza, a Palestinian, who said, quote, "What you're doing in Gaza is a crime, but you're going to commit an even worse crime, which is that after we've already paid the costs of this war, which means the total annihilation of Gaza, Hamas will still be there. You will leave Hamas alive when you leave. Hamas will still be in charge." Basically, Israeli experts, Israeli politicians, American experts, American politicians, they all knew this very well. There's sort of a long academic and history and expertise on this topic of how military options against non-state armed actors never work. There was an article, I think the most well-researched article on the topic is one written by the RAND Corporation, one of the top think tanks worldwide. And that was in 2008. And the headline, the topic of it was, quote, "How Terrorist Groups End." They looked at hundreds of different organizations around the world, militant organizations, and they found that only 7% of these organizations were defeated militarily, 7%. The vast majority, 43%, were dismantled through a political, peaceful process of negotiations like the IRA and the Sinn Féin in Ireland. So they knew this. As one American recently retired ambassador, senior diplomat, put it to me in November 2023, basically their approach was, let Israel smash a few things, let them get it out of their system. They saw that Israel was so indignant at how dare those subhumans, those sub-creatures in Gaza, those inferior Arabs, Rabushim, as they call us, how dare they strike the much stronger, superior Israeli Jewish state. There was this indignation that the Americans saw Israel needs to vent off. They need to basically like smash a few things, take the revenge out, burn Gaza to the ground. And they basically, that was the approach. Let them do it out of bloodlust and vengeance, no strategy. Like up until now, I cannot think of wars that you would go into without having an exit strategy, without having an end goal. In Israel's case, there was never an exit strategy up until now. There's no exit plan. There's no day after plan. And that is deliberate. They were never planning on leaving. There was no willingness to exit in the first place. They were there to continue the destruction on a daily basis because the spectacle of it was very satisfying. It was quenching the thirst for the Israeli public to see Gazans humiliated, tormented, suffering in pain in order for Netanyahu to cling on to power. That he needed to keep these sceneries flowing to an Israeli audience.
Right. I'm going to turn over to Samar, but the Wall Street Journal is saying in their about Netanyahu, the headline says Netanyahu strikes cautious tone on Gaza ceasefire as he tries to hold government together, and basically saying that in his message today that he announced that saying negotiations were continuing and a deal would be announced only once they were completed. Meanwhile, President-elect Trump took a victory lap, saying, quote, "The epic ceasefire agreement could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November," end quote. So Trump is hailing it as an epic victory or deal. And Netanyahu is saying, well, the negotiations are continuing when really the negotiators already agreed and signed the deal, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. The deal was reached already. Go ahead, Samar. Sorry.
No, I just want to reintroduce you, Mohammed, to our listeners. This is True Talk on WMNF 88.5 FM. My co-host Ahmed, Bedier, and myself, Samar Jarrah, are talking to Gaza journalist and writer Mohammed Shehada. His last name is Shehada. If you want to Google him and read lots of articles that were published in lots of mainstream media, actually, not only alternative media. But now that Ahmed is mentioning Trump, I want to go to a tweet that you tweeted about 2 hours ago. And you are saying, and I'm quoting here, I'm seeing a great deal of hero worshipping Trump because of the Gaza deal. Hold your horses. Why are you saying this, Muhammad?
Well, basically, a lot of reasons. If you look at Trump's immediate team, no matter what people might have of illusions or opinions about Trump, his team is the most messianic, the most extremist, most pro-Israeli that you can ever imagine. Someone like his ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, he's basically saying Palestinians are non-existent people. There's no such thing as West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. All of it should be Israel's. Look at Pete Hegseth or any of his officials, Mike Waltz or even Steve Witkoff. They are competing who is the most anti-Palestinian figure in the administration. Even before the administration walked into the White House, this record on Israel-Palestine, it's abysmal. Defunding Palestinian cancer hospitals in East Jerusalem, defunding all aid to Palestine, including through U.S. aid or the United Nations through UNRWA, cutting all supplies to the West Bank and Gaza, empowering Israel to carry out basically what we saw during the Great March of Return, the largest nonviolent Palestinian protest in decades, where Trump gave the green light for Israel to take pot shots at demonstrators and wound. They shot to inflict permanent wounds. They wounded about 34 or 43,000 people. There was also about, I think, 250 people who were killed just marching weekly with their bare chests to Israel's prime defense, demanding that the blockade be ended on Gaza. I can go on and on and on his track record, but there's also the other element that I mentioned, the gift bag that he's giving Israel. Number one, that there is a possibility, a very, very major one, that he will allow Israel to resume the genocide in Gaza as soon as the hostages are out, or as soon as phase one is concluded. And that number two, he's going to give them a lot of gifts in the West Bank that would be immensely dangerous for the basic survival as well as existence of Palestinians. So it's very dangerous. With Trump himself, I think he has a lot of good chemistry with Mahmoud Abbas, of all people. I don't understand why, but he likes him. There's another Palestinian veteran diplomat, Nabil Sha'at. He used to be Trump's teacher in college. He was his professor. Trump was one of his pupils. And when they met, basically Nabil Sha'at went on TV and said, yeah, Trump was not a very smart student. He didn't do all his homework. That was a very, very serious mistake to make. We paid dearly for that kind of remark. No, but anyways, with Mahmoud Abbas, Trump went in 2017 to Bethlehem, to the West Bank, to meet Mahmoud Abbas face to face. And they got along extremely well as two individuals. Abbas, he brought maps. He gave the full Palestinian Authority position. He said, we want only 22% of historic Palestine. Israel keeps 78%. With land swaps, Israel gets to keep the majority of its settlements in the West Bank and give us a land of equal measure in return. The Palestinian state will be demilitarized. There will be NATO and American soldiers on the borders between Israel and Palestine and Jordan and Palestine to ensure Israel's security and safety. And he gave all these compromises immediately on the spot. Trump's response, he was in shock. He said to Abbas, I thought you were an extremist. They told me you're radical, but you're very moderate. We can do business together. Abbas, he looked to his team and he said, guys, I think we solved the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And then Trump, he said, and I got that on good word of a very senior Palestinian official. He was the advisor to the prime minister at the time, and he was present in the meeting. He said, Trump told Mahmoud Abbas, you know what? When you get to the part of the land swaps, when you negotiate the land swaps with Israel, call me, ask for my advice. I worked in real estate. That's how I made all my money. I'm a businessman. I know how to pick up a good land slot. I'm going to help you to pick up good pieces of land. It was as intimate as this. But, and here's the twist, as immediate as Trump left the room, he barely walked out. Then his son-in-law walked in again to Saeb Ariqat, the Palestinian Liberation Organization's chief negotiator. And he told Ariqat, forget every single thing that Trump just told you. None of it matters. You deal with me. You're not dealing with him. You deal with me. And walked away. So even if Trump made some promises that make some people optimistic, even if his rhetorics might delude some people, he's easily influenced and manipulated by the people around him. He's a businessman who cares about transactionalism more than anything else. There's the positive thing, and that's the last thing I would say, is that what makes him different from Biden is that Biden was ideologically, fanatically pro-Israeli. The senior Arab official that was engaged with the Biden administration in their lame duck period, trying to get him to do anything differently now that elections are out of the way and it's all about Biden's legacy. She told me in late November, she said, no, forget about it. You're not going to get anything out of this guy. He believes that if any changes he makes vis-a-vis Israel will taint his legacy, will tarnish his reputation. He wants to be remembered as the most pro-Israeli president ever.
Ahmed, the more you speak, the more I have questions for you. But we are almost running out of time. But I want to ask about the latest developments in the West Bank. There is a lot of resistance, military armed, I would say armed resistance by young Palestinians, and Mahmoud Abbas forces are the ones who are arresting them and killing them, and they are coordinating with the IDF. What is the latest? Do you think that there will be, let's say they signed the ceasefire agreement and it continues in Gaza? Do you envision a military intifada in the West Bank if Mahmoud Abbas and Trump agree on this land swap that you're talking about?
I would imagine not necessarily if they agree, because I don't think they will get to a point of reaching a final solution. But I would imagine that if Trump reinstates the major risk of West Bank annexation, that it would boil the West Bank again, especially if there is a prospect of some senior Palestinian leaders being released out of prison in the ceasefire negotiations and the prisoner swap. That can have a major impact on revitalizing the West Bank. On the other side, on the PA's campaign in Jenin, the PA, when it came into being, it was supposed to be three things. It's a service provider, and it's a promise of Palestinian statehood, a transitional entity towards a state, and it's a police force, a subcontractor of Israel's occupation, a police force whose primary mandate is not to protect Palestinians, but to protect Israel, to prove to Israel that if Palestinians are given a state, that state will not sort of constitute any security risk towards Israel, which means the PA only protects Israel and Israeli settlers from Palestinian attacks, but not the other way around. As soon as the IDF enters a Palestinian neighborhood, PA security forces, they need to hide. They need to get out of the picture. They're not even allowed to stand and watch. They need to hide in shops, in homes, indoors, whatever, disappear. So basically, for Israel, they don't care about the PA providing good services, and they don't want the PA to lead to a Palestinian state, but they wanted to continue to be a subcontractor of the occupation, a police force that is cost-free for Israel, which is why traditionally the Israeli strategy has always been to weaken the Palestinian Authority and put them on the verge of collapse, so they don't have any energy or resources or time to fight for a Palestinian state. So they would be always concerned with their survival more than anything, and the survival of their VIP privileges. But at the same time, like, keep them on the brink, but don't allow them to actually collapse. Because if they collapse, that means Palestinians in the West Bank rising up against Israel. So there's also another dimension. The PA traditionally is trying to seek legitimacy from two opposing audiences, from the Palestinian public who wants a Palestinian state or wants freedom at the very basic level, liberation, and they are seeking legitimacy from their donor base and Israel, Western donors, the US, Europe, etc., Canada, and Israel, basically. And these two are in opposite ends. They want opposite things. Israel, the international community, wants the PA to provide Israel with security. Palestinians want the PA to lead the resistance. So the PA has always been sort of dancing, trying to strike a balancing act of not going too far in collaborating with Israel, but at the same time not leading any genuine Palestinian struggle towards liberation or statehood. Basically, you had a Palestinian prime minister like Salam Fayyad, perfectly symbolizes this. He was trying to establish on the ground as a de facto fait accompli matter institutions of the Palestinian state without clashing with Israel, so that his approach was saying if it walks
Mohammed,
like a duck,
we only have
walks like a duck, it is a duck.
5
Sorry,
seconds left, so we have to interrupt you. I'm sorry. We can talk to you all day, but we hope to have you back in the near future as a ceasefire, as we wait to see if this ceasefire actually happens. This has been True Talk on WMNF, WMNF